Marcus Washington stared at the airline CEO's shocked face as security escorted the entire flight crew away. 20 minutes earlier, he'd been humiliated, forced to surrender his first-class seat despite being a Fortune 500 CEO. Now, with his phone recording going viral, the tables had dramatically turned. Before we dive into this shocking story of justice served, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of their skin, color, and subscribe to catch more incredible true stories of people standing up against discrimination. Now, let's rewind to see how this successful Black executive turned a humiliating experience into a powerful moment of accountability. Marcus Washington had always defied the odds. At 42, he had transformed from a determined kid from Chicago's South Side to the brilliant CEO of NextGen Technologies, a revolutionary artificial intelligence company valued at billions. His journey wasn't just impressive, it was exceptional in a country where Black CEOs remained disturbingly rare. That Tuesday morning had begun like many others in his meticulously organized life. Marcus reviewed his presentation one final time in his Atlanta penthouse while adjusting his custom Tom Ford suit. Today wasn't just any meeting. It was potentially the most significant deal of his career. Japanese investors were prepared to inject $300 million into NextGen's groundbreaking medical AI technology, and the meeting in San Francisco would determine whether years of innovation would reach their full potential. "Mr. Washington, your car is waiting downstairs," his home system announced. Marcus nodded, sliding his tablet into his leather briefcase. He had specifically booked a premium first-class ticket on Coastal Airlines to ensure he would arrive refreshed and prepared. The 6-hour flight would give him the perfect opportunity to review his notes one last time and mentally prepare for the investors' challenging questions. His executive assistant Shanice had confirmed all the details 3 times. "I've spoken with Coastal's VIP services," she had assured him yesterday. "They've noted your status in their system, and you'll receive priority boarding and enhanced service. The reservation is confirmed for seat 1-A, a window seat in first class." "Thank you, Shanice. You're always thorough," Marcus had replied, appreciating her attention to detail. Now, as his driver navigated through Atlanta's morning traffic toward the international airport, Marcus mentally rehearsed his presentation while responding to early morning emails. He had built NextGen from a startup in his garage to a company revolutionizing healthcare AI. Today's meeting could help bring life-saving technology to hospitals worldwide. The familiar tension settled in his shoulders as they approached the airport terminal. No matter how successful he became, airports always triggered a particular vigilance in him. He had learned from experience that his success didn't shield him from the assumptions people made. When they saw his skin, "Good luck with your meeting, sir," his driver said, unloading his minimal luggage. "Thank you, James. I appreciate it." The premium check-in line moved quickly, but Marcus noticed the subtle shift in the agent's expression when he approached. That momentary surprise that still appeared too often when people saw a Black man in expensive clothing. He had grown accustomed to it, though the resignation that came with that familiarity bothered him more than the microaggressions themselves. "Business trip?" the TSA agent asked with unusual interest as he examined Marcus's ID, despite the hundreds of business travelers passing through every hour. "Yes," Marcus replied simply, maintaining the calm, measured tone he had perfected over years of similar interactions. "Need to check that laptop separately," the agent added. Despite having just waved through 3 white executives with identical equipment, Marcus complied without comment. He had learned long ago to choose his battles carefully. His father's words echoed in his mind, "You've got to be twice as good to get half as far." Even now, as one of the most successful tech executives in the country, those words remained painfully relevant. After clearing security, Marcus headed to the first-class lounge. He had an hour before boarding, just enough time to respond to urgent emails and review the competitive analysis section of his presentation. The lounge attendant scanned his boarding pass, and again, that flicker of surprise crossed her face. "Can I see some ID as well?" she asked. Marcus produced his license without comment. noting that the white businessman ahead of him had been waved through with just a boarding pass. These small indignities had become so routine that he almost didn't notice them anymore. Almost. Inside the lounge, he selected a quiet corner and opened his laptop. The stakes for today couldn't be higher. NextGen's AI diagnostic system had shown 98% accuracy in early trials, potentially saving thousands of lives by catching conditions human doctors might miss. The Japanese investment would accelerate development and deployment worldwide. When the boarding announcement came, Marcus packed up efficiently and headed to the gate. Despite the weight of the upcoming meeting, he felt prepared and confident. He had overcome far greater obstacles than convincing investors of his company's value. What he didn't realize was that his greatest challenge that day would come before he even reached San Francisco. Now boarding our first-class passengers for Coastal Airlines Flight 1857 to San Francisco, the gate agent announced. Marcus moved forward with the small group of premium passengers, his boarding pass displayed clearly on his phone. He approached the scanner with the practiced efficiency of someone who flew weekly. The machine beeped green, confirming his priority status and seat assignment. "Enjoy your flight, sir," the gate agent said mechanically, already looking past him to the next passenger. Marcus made his way down the jet bridge, briefcase in hand. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant with a name tag reading Brittany Miller greeted passengers with a practiced smile. However, when her eyes landed on Marcus, the smile flickered, replaced momentarily by something resembling confusion or suspicion. "Boarding pass," she requested, despite having not asked the same of the elderly white couple who had just entered. Marcus displayed his phone screen without comment. "First class is to the left," she said, her tone notably cooler than the warm welcome she had offered previous passengers. Marcus nodded and proceeded to the luxurious front cabin. He found his assigned window seat, 1-A, and efficiently stored his briefcase in the overhead compartment, keeping only his tablet for the flight. As he settled into the spacious leather seat, he noticed how Brittany warmly welcomed a white executive type, laughing at his mild joke about needing an early cocktail. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage?" she asked the man with genuine warmth. When she turned to Marcus, her smile tightened. "Sir, no warmth, just professional obligation. Water, please," Marcus replied, already opening his tablet to review his presentation. The first-class cabin gradually filled with passengers, predominantly white executives and wealthy travelers. Marcus remained focused on his work, making final notes on key points for the investor meeting. He barely noticed when the final first-class passenger boarded, until a shadow fell across his tablet. "Excuse me, you're in my seat." Marcus looked up to find a middle-aged white man in an off-the-rack suit staring down at him. With undisguised annoyance, the man's face was flushed, either from rushing to make the flight or from the indignation of finding his expected seat occupied. "I think there must be some mistake," Marcus replied calmly, reaching for his phone to display his boarding pass. "I'm in 1-A. "No, I'm in 1-A, the man insisted, thrusting his own boarding pass forward. "Richard Whitfield, seat 1-A. Marcus examined both boarding passes on their respective phones. His clearly showed Washington. Marcus, seat 1-A, while Whitfield's appeared to show the same seat assignment. "There seems to be a duplicate assignment," Marcus observed reasonably. "We should call the flight attendant to sort this out." Before he could signal for assistance, Brittany was already approaching, having observed the interaction. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, looking directly at Whitfield rather than Marcus. "Yes, this man is in my seat," Whitfield declared confidently. Marcus calmly displayed his boarding pass. "There appears to be a duplicate assignment. My pass clearly shows I'm assigned to 1-A. Brittany barely glanced at Marcus's boarding pass before turning to Whitfield with a sympathetic expression. "Let me see your boarding pass, sir." After examining Whitfield's pass, she immediately turned to Marcus. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move. This gentleman has been assigned seat 1-A, but my boarding pass also shows 1-A, Marcus replied, maintaining his composure while feeling the familiar burn of unfair treatment. Perhaps you could check the system to see what happened." Brittany's expression hardened. "Sir, I can see that. Mr. Whitfield has been assigned this seat. There must be a mistake with your boarding. By now." Other first-class passengers were watching the interaction with undisguised interest. Marcus felt the weight of their stares as he once again held up his phone. "My boarding pass clearly shows seat 12A, he repeated. "I boarded correctly. The gate agent verified my seat. And I'd appreciate if you would check the system rather than simply taking his word over mine." Brittany's lips thinned. "I'll need to call my supervisor." As she moved away to use the cabin phone, Whitfield remained standing in the aisle, arms crossed, looking at Marcus expectantly as though waiting for him to vacate the seat. Without further verification, within minutes, the head flight attendant arrived. Her name tag read Catherine Johnson, and she carried herself with the authority of someone used to resolving conflicts. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked, again directing her question to Whitfield rather than Marcus. Whitfield jumped in before Marcus could speak. "I'm assigned seat 12A, but this gentleman won't move." Marcus kept his voice steady despite his growing frustration. "My boarding pass also shows 12A. I'd like someone to check the system to resolve this duplicate assignment properly." Catherine gave Marcus a cursory glance before examining both boarding passes. "Sir," she said to Marcus, "there seems to be some confusion. Perhaps you misunderstood your seating assignment." "There's no misunderstanding," Marcus replied firmly. "My boarding pass clearly shows 12A, and the gate agent verified it when I boarded." Catherine's expression suggested she found his persistence troublesome. "Let me check the manifest." She stepped away briefly to consult a tablet, then returned with a look of practiced patience that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir," she addressed Marcus, "it appears there was a system error. Mr. Whitfield was assigned this seat several weeks ago. We'll need to find you alternative seating." "I booked this seat months in advance specifically for this flight," Marcus countered, feeling increasingly uncomfortable as more passengers stared at the unfolding scene. "I'm a frequent flyer with your airline and confirmed this reservation yesterday." By now, a small crowd of crew members had gathered. The purser approached, followed by two more flight attendants. The situation was escalating far beyond what a simple seating error should warrant. "Is there a problem here?" A male voice cut through the tension. Captain William Hayes had emerged from the cockpit, his presence immediately commanding attention. Catherine quickly explained the situation, notably emphasizing Whitfield's claim while minimizing Marcus's valid concerns. The captain turned to Marcus with an expression that had already decided the outcome. "Sir, I understand there's confusion about the seating, but we need to resolve this quickly to maintain our departure time. I'm going to have to ask you to accept alternative seating." "Captain," Marcus said evenly, "my boarding pass assigns me to this seat. I'm simply asking that someone verify the correct assignment in the system, rather than making assumptions." The captain's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm responsible for this aircraft and everyone on it. If you continue to cause a disturbance, I'll have no choice but to have you removed from the flight." The threat hung in the air. Marcus looked around at the circle of white faces staring at him. The crew members united against him, the passengers watching with mixtures of discomfort and judgment. In that moment, he recognized the impossible position he was in. Despite being a CEO worth millions, despite having a valid boarding pass, despite being completely in the right, he was still just a black man being perceived as difficult. "Fine," he said quietly, gathering his tablet. "I'll move." Brittany's smile returned instantly as she turned to Whitfield. "We apologize for the inconvenience, sir. Can I get you a complimentary beverage while you get settled?" No such offer was extended to Marcus as Catherine led him back through the first-class cabin, past the premium economy section, and into the main economy cabin. "This is the only seat available," she said, gesturing to a middle seat in row 34, wedged between two already seated passengers who looked up with visible annoyance at the prospect of losing their armrest space. Marcus looked at the cramped seat, then back at Catherine. "My company paid for a first-class ticket. You can contact customer service after your flight about a partial refund." She replied dismissively, "Now please take your seat. We're delaying departure." As Marcus squeezed into the middle seat, He felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete powerlessness. Despite all his success, all his wealth, all his status, in this moment, he was reduced to nothing more than his skin color, and there wasn't a thing he could do about it. Or so they thought. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. 20 minutes earlier, Marcus had been comfortably seated in the spacious luxury of first class with ample legroom, a wide leather seat, and personalized service. Now his 6-foot frame was crammed into a narrow middle seat in row 34, his knees pressing painfully against the seat in front of him, his elbows tucked tightly against his sides to avoid invading his neighbor's space. His $10,000 Tom Ford suit, meticulously selected for the investor meeting, was already developing wrinkles. His seatmates, a heavyset man by the window who spilled over into Marcus's space, and a college student on the aisle who had her headphones on and was actively ignoring the intrusion, made it impossible to find a comfortable position. "Excuse me," Marcus called to a passing flight attendant, different from those he'd encountered in first class. "My briefcase is still in the overhead compartment in first class. It has materials I need for this flight." The flight attendant sighed as though his request was unreasonable. "I'll see if someone can bring it back, but we're preparing for departure." Marcus glanced at his watch. The meeting with the Japanese investors was scheduled for 3 hours after his expected arrival, usually giving him plenty of time to refresh and prepare. Now, with no ability to work during the flight and the physical discomfort guaranteed to leave him exhausted, that cushion felt dangerously thin. He tried to extract his tablet from his jacket pocket, but the confined space made even this simple task difficult. When he finally managed it, he discovered another problem. Economy seats had no power outlets. His tablet, at 30% battery, wouldn't last for his presentation preparation and the meeting itself. "We apologize for the delay in departure," the captain's voice came over the intercom, the same man who had threatened to remove Marcus from the flight. "We're just finishing some paperwork and should be on our way shortly." Marcus closed his eyes, trying to center himself. In his rise from Chicago's South Side to Harvard Business School to the C-suite, he had encountered countless instances of discrimination, both subtle and overt. He had learned to choose his battles, to recognize when pushing back would cost more than it would gain. But something about this incident felt different, more blatant, more humiliating, more unjust. As the plane finally began to taxi, Marcus overheard two flight attendants conversing in the galley just behind his row. "Did you see that guy they had to move from first?" one asked. "Yeah," the other replied with a snicker. "These people always think they belong in first class. Probably used points or got upgraded accidentally," the first one suggested. The look on his face when they moved him was priceless. Marcus kept his expression neutral, but their words burned like acid. These people. The casual racism was as painful as it was familiar. The assumption that he couldn't possibly belong in first class, that his presence there must have been some kind of mistake or fluke. Have you ever been in a situation where you were treated unfairly because of how you look? Comment number 1 if you've experienced discrimination in any form, and hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their race. Subscribe to see more stories of people fighting back against injustice. Now, what would you do in Marcus's position? Would you stay quiet or find a way to stand up for yourself? The next part of this story might surprise you. What the flight attendants didn't realize was that their conversation had another listener. A young white woman seated across the aisle from Marcus had removed her earbuds. When she noticed the commotion, Jessica Taylor frowned as she heard the attendant's remarks, then glanced at Marcus. Their eyes met briefly, and something in her expression suggested not pity, but genuine concern. Marcus turned away, focusing on controlling his breathing and managing his anger. This physical discomfort was temporary, he reminded himself. The meeting was what mattered. He would deal with Coastal Airlines after his business was concluded. The plane reached cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign dinged off. The man next to Marcus immediately reclined his seat fully, further reducing what little space Marcus had. His phone buzzed with messages from the investors, confirming details for their meeting. The stakes of that meeting pressed on him along with the physical discomfort of his seating. "Excuse me," he called to another passing flight attendant. "Is there any chance there's a seat available in premium economy or business class? I'm willing to pay for an upgrade." The flight attendant barely paused. "Flight's full. No seats available." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. He returned to his breathing exercises, techniques he had learned to manage stress during the high-pressure days of building his company. From nothing, the physical discomfort of the cramped seat was more than just an inconvenience. It was a visceral reminder of the burdens Black Americans carried every day. No matter how successful he became, no matter how many billions his company was worth, no matter how impeccable his credentials, he could still be reduced to this. Squeezed into a space too small, his dignity compressed along with his body, his legitimate complaints dismissed, his very presence treated as an imposition. The beverage service began, with flight attendants working their way slowly from the front of the plane. Marcus watched as Richard Whitfield, visible in first class when Marcus craned his neck, was served champagne with a smile. The man had settled comfortably into the seat that rightfully belonged to Marcus, completely untroubled by the injustice that had put him there. As the beverage cart finally reached row 34, Jessica Taylor, the young woman across the aisle, stood up. "I need to use the restroom," she told the flight attendant, stepping into the aisle. As she passed Marcus's row, she discreetly dropped a folded napkin onto his lap before continuing toward the back of the plane. Curious, Marcus unfolded the napkin when the attendants weren't looking. On it was written, "I saw what happened. I recorded the flight attendant's comments. I work for Coastal corporate office. This isn't right." For the first time since boarding, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't powerless after all. He carefully tucked the napkin into his pocket and waited for Jessica's return. When she came back from the restroom, their eyes met again. This time, Marcus gave her a nearly imperceptible nod, the smallest gesture of acknowledgement, but in it was the seed of what would become a reckoning. 3 hours into the 6-hour flight, the cabin lights dimmed for the mid-flight rest period. Most passengers dozed or watched movies on their screens, creating a cocoon of relative privacy despite the crowded conditions. Marcus had spent the time attempting to review his presentation on his tablet, though the cramped space and lack of a table made it nearly impossible to work effectively. As the flight attendants began another beverage service, Jessica Taylor stood and made her way to the galley. A few minutes later, she returned down the aisle, pausing briefly beside Marcus's row. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I believe you dropped this when you boarded." She handed him a business card. As Marcus took it, she gave him a meaningful look before returning to her seat. The card identified her as Jessica Taylor, Assistant Director of Customer Experience at Coastal Airlines corporate headquarters. On the back, she had written, "Meet me at the rear galley in 10 minutes." Marcus tucked the card into his pocket. For the next 10 minutes, he considered his options carefully. As a successful Black man in America, he had learned to navigate situations like this with strategic precision. Every move had consequences, and the wrong approach could easily backfire, reinforcing the very stereotypes he had spent his life disproving. When enough time had passed, he excused himself from his row and made his way to the rear of the aircraft. Jessica was waiting near the galley, appearing to organize items in her carry-on bag as cover for their meeting. "I'm sorry about what happened to you," she said quietly when Marcus approached. "I've worked for Coastal for 5 years, and I've seen this pattern too many times." "Thank you for reaching out," Marcus replied, keeping his voice low. It was unexpected. Jessica glanced around to ensure no flight attendants were within earshot. "I recorded their comments about you after you were moved." She held up her phone discreetly. "And I wasn't the only one who noticed what happened. During boarding, several passengers were uncomfortable with how you were treated." Marcus considered this information carefully. "What made you decide to help me?" "Most people just look away. My brother married a Black woman 3 years ago," Jessica explained. "Since then, I've seen how differently they're treated when they travel together versus when he travels alone. It opened my eyes." She paused. "Plus, it's literally my job to ensure customers have positive experiences with our airline." What happened to you was the opposite of our stated values. Marcus nodded, understanding her motivations. What do you suggest we do? Document everything, Jessica advised. I can confirm that there was no legitimate reason for you to be moved. I checked the manifest through my employee app. When I saw what was happening, you were correctly assigned to 1-2A. Mr. Whitfield was actually booked in 1-B, but claimed your seat, and the crew never properly verified. This confirmation of what Marcus had already suspected, that he had been right all along, sent a wave of controlled anger through him. He had built his career on facts, data, and truth. To have the truth so casually dismissed because of his skin color was profoundly offensive. I'm going to start recording my interactions with the crew for the remainder of the flight. Marcus decided, not to escalate the situation, but to ensure there's a record. Jessica nodded. That's wise. I need to return to my seat before anyone gets suspicious, but I'll support whatever action you decide to take after we land. As they prepared to separate, Marcus said, I never caught your full name. Jessica Taylor. She replied, extending her hand. And you, Marcus Washington. Recognition flashed in her eyes. Wait, Marcus Washington of NextGen Technologies? Marcus nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips for the first time since boarding. Oh my God. Jessica whispered, you're one of the most successful CEOs in the country. This is even worse than I thought. Success doesn't shield us from these experiences, Marcus said quietly. Sometimes it just changes the form they take. They parted ways, with Jessica returning to her seat first. Marcus waited a few moments before following, his mind working through the implications of what he had learned in formulating a plan. When he returned to his row, he discreetly took out his phone and enabled the recording function. For the next hour, he documented every interaction with the flight crew, noting the marked difference in how they treated him compared to white passengers. During the next beverage service, flight attendant Brittany from first class had rotated to economy. She immediately recognized Marcus and appeared visibly nervous when she noticed him recording with his phone. Sir, you need to turn that off during flight, she said sharply. Actually, FAA regulations permit the use of smartphones in airplane mode, which mine is. Marcus replied calmly, I'm not making calls, just documenting my customer experience. Brittany's expression tightened. I'll need to speak with the purser about this. Please do, Marcus responded. In fact, I'd like to speak with the purser myself about the seating issue from earlier. Brittany hurried away, and soon the purser, Michael Evans, approached Marcus's row with a stern expression. Sir, I understand you're causing a disturbance. He began. No disturbance, Marcus replied evenly, phone still recording. I simply requested to speak with you about being removed from my assigned first-class seat. Without proper verification of the seating assignments, Evans glanced at the phone, clearly uncomfortable with being recorded. Sir, that matter was resolved during boarding. Captain Hayes made the final decision. The matter wasn't resolved, it was imposed, Marcus corrected. At no point did anyone actually check the passenger manifest to verify the correct seat assignments. I'd like you to do that now. That's not possible during flight, Evans claimed. Actually, it is, Marcus countered. Every purser has access to the complete manifest through the crew tablet. I'm simply asking you to verify which passenger was originally assigned to seat 1-2A. Evans shifted uncomfortably, aware that several nearby passengers were now listening. Sir, you should be grateful you're on this flight at all. Your attitude during boarding could have resulted in your removal from the aircraft. The coded language, attitude, was not lost on Marcus. It was a word often used to describe black people who stood up for themselves, who refused to simply accept mistreatment. I'd like your employee ID number, Marcus stated calmly, and the employee ID numbers of flight attendants Brittany Miller, Catherine Johnson, and Captain Hayes. Why would you need that information? Evans asked defensively. For the formal complaint I'll be filing with Coastal Airlines Customer Relations, the Department of Transportation, and potentially my attorneys, Marcus replied. Now, will you check the manifest? Or shall I add refusal to verify passenger information to my complaint? Evans reluctantly produced the crew tablet and, after several moments of scrolling, his face paled visibly. Well, Marcus prompted, there appears to have been an error. Evans admitted reluctantly, the system shows you were indeed assigned to 12A and Mr. Whitfield. After another pause, 1 to B. Thank you for confirming what I stated during boarding, Marcus said. His voice steadied despite the anger and vindication swirling within him. I'll expect compensation for the downgrade from first class to economy, of course. You'll need to contact customer service after the flight. Evans replied stiffly before retreating to the front of the plane. As the purser left, Marcus noticed several passengers giving him subtle nods of support. The man who had been sleeping next to him was now awake and had overheard the entire exchange. That's messed up, man, he said quietly. They just assumed you were wrong without checking. Marcus nodded in acknowledgement. He pulled out his phone again, this time to send a series of carefully worded texts to his executive team and legal counsel. He didn't detail the full situation, that would come later, but he set certain processes in motion. Years of business experience had taught him the value of preparation. Jessica caught his eye from across the aisle and gave him a thumbs up. The pieces were falling into place. What the Coastal Airlines crew didn't realize was that they hadn't just discriminated against any passenger, they had discriminated against someone with the resources and determination to hold them accountable. And Marcus Washington was just getting started. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into San Francisco International Airport. Please return to your seats, fasten your seatbelts, and ensure your tray tables are in the upright and locked position. The captain's voice, the same one that had threatened to remove Marcus from the flight hours earlier, now sounded routinely professional over the intercom. Marcus straightened his seat, feeling the stiffness in his back from hours in the cramped economy section. His $10,000 suit was hopelessly wrinkled, his presentation materials still inaccessible in his briefcase, stored in the first-class overhead bin. As the plane descended through clouds toward the California coastline, flight attendants made their final checks of the cabin. Brittany pointedly avoided eye contact with Marcus as she passed his row. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just landed at San Francisco International Airport, the captain announced as the plane touched down and began taxiing toward the gate. Local time is 11:22 a.m. Weather is 65 degrees with partly cloudy skies. On behalf of Coastal Airlines and our Star Alliance partners, we thank you for flying with us today. As the aircraft approached the gate, another announcement came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you remain seated with your seatbelts fastened after we arrive at the gate. We have a special procedure that needs to be completed before deplaning can begin. Murmurs of confusion and impatience rippled through the cabin. Frequent flyers exchanged glances, recognizing this as unusual. Marcus remained still, watching the reactions of the crew members as they conferred quietly at the front of the cabin. Brittany's face had lost some of its color, and Catherine was checking her phone with a furrowed brow. The plane came to a stop at the gate. Normally, this would be followed by the sound of seatbelts unfastening as impatient passengers prepared to retrieve their belongings. But the captain's request and the unusual tension emanating from the crew kept most passengers compliant. The aircraft door opened, but instead of the usual jet bridge personnel, two individuals in dark suits boarded the aircraft. Marcus recognized the universal demeanor of security professionals, alert, observant, and projecting calm authority. The cabin grew quiet as passengers speculated about their presence. Many eyes turned toward Marcus, the assumption being that these officers had come for the black man who had caused a disturbance earlier. Marcus himself remained outwardly calm, though he felt the familiar tension that came with being black in the presence of authority figures. What happened next stunned everyone on board. The security officers moved directly to the first-class cabin. After a brief conversation with the lead flight attendant, they approached seat 12A, the seat that should have been Marcus's, the seat now occupied by Richard Whitfield. "Sir, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us," one officer stated firmly. Whitfield's voice carried clearly through the now silent aircraft. "What? Why? I haven't done anything, sir. Please lower your voice and comply. We can discuss the matter off the aircraft." This is ridiculous." Whitfield's voice rose in indignation. "Do you know who I am? I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what this is about." The contrast was impossible to miss. Whitfield's belligerent response to authority versus the calm compliance Marcus had shown when unfairly removed from his seat. Yet Whitfield was being addressed with professional courtesy despite his outburst. Captain Hayes emerged from the cockpit, his face ashen. He conferred briefly with the security officers, then approached Whitfield. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm going to have to ask you to cooperate and deplane with these officers. What is the meaning of this?" Whitfield demanded, loud enough for the entire plane to hear. "I paid for the seat, actually." "You didn't," a new voice interjected. Jessica Taylor had moved to the front of the plane and now stood in the aisle of the first-class cabin. Mr. Whitfield was assigned seat 1 to B. He claimed seat 1 to A, which was rightfully assigned to another passenger. The crew failed to verify this before displacing the legitimate seat holder. The cabin erupted in whispers. Marcus remained seated, continuing to record the unfolding drama on his phone. "Who are you?" Captain Hayes demanded of Jessica. "Jessica Taylor, Assistant Director of Customer Experience, Coastal Airlines Corporate Office," she replied, displaying her ID badge. "And we have a serious problem with how this flight was handled." As this exchange occurred, Marcus noticed several crew members frantically checking their phones. Their expressions shifted from confusion to alarm. Catherine, the head flight attendant, who had been instrumental in removing Marcus from his seat, visibly paled as she read something on her screen. A third person boarded the aircraft, a woman in a tailored suit who carried herself with unmistakable executive authority. "Captain Hayes," she addressed the pilot directly. "I'm Alicia Morales, Vice President of Operations for Coastal Airlines. There's been a serious incident on this flight that requires immediate attention." The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed completely. The crew members, who had been so confident in their dismissal of Marcus, now looked uncertain and afraid. Richard Whitfield, sensing the shift in power dynamics, had fallen silent. Morales turned to address the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Coastal Airlines, I apologize for the delay in deplaning. We're addressing a serious customer service issue. First class and business class passengers may now begin deplaning. Economy passengers, please remain seated momentarily." As the premium passengers began gathering their belongings, Morales approached row 34. She stopped beside Marcus's seat. "Mr. Washington," she inquired quietly. Marcus nodded. "Still recording. I'd like to personally escort you off the aircraft first and address what happened today. Your belongings from the first-class cabin have been collected." Marcus finally stopped his recording and stood, straightening his wrinkled suit as best he could. As he stepped into the aisle, the significance of the moment was not lost on him or the other passengers. The man who had been humiliated and relegated to the back of the plane was now being escorted out first, ahead of everyone else. As he walked forward, Marcus passed Richard Whitfield, who was being questioned by the security officers in the galley. Whitfield's face registered shock as he realized the man he had displaced was not just any passenger. "You're Marcus Washington," Whitfield stammered, recognition dawning. "The CEO of NextGen Technologies." Marcus paused only briefly. "Yes, I am, and you're in my seat." The simple statement carried the weight of centuries of injustice and the promise of accountability to come. As Marcus continued toward the exit, crew members who had dismissed him hours earlier now couldn't meet his eyes. Captain Hayes attempted an intervention as Marcus passed the cockpit. "Mr. Washington, I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding." "Save it for the deposition," Marcus replied calmly, continuing to walk. As he reached the aircraft door, Marcus turned to Jessica. "Thank you for your integrity today." She nodded. It was the right thing to do. Alicia Morales led Marcus down the jet bridge. "Mr. Washington, a car is waiting to take you to our premium rival lounge. Our CEO has been notified of the situation and would like to speak with you personally." "I'm not interested in a private conversation," Marcus replied. "What happened today wasn't just about me. It was about a systemic problem that affects countless passengers who don't have my resources or platform." Morales nodded soberly. "I understand." What would you like to happen next? Justice, Marcus answered simply, and not the kind that's negotiated behind closed doors. As they emerged into the terminal, Marcus spotted his executive assistant Shanice waiting anxiously. She rushed forward, relief evident on her face. Marcus, I've been trying to reach you since I got your text. The investors agreed to push the meeting back 2 hours. Are you okay? What happened? Marcus took a deep breath, the first one that felt full and unrestricted since he'd boarded the plane in Atlanta. I'm fine, Shanice, but Coastal Airlines is about to have the worst day in their corporate history. He turned back to Morales. I'll need the names and employee IDs of everyone involved in today's incident, from the gate agents to the captain, and I want the unedited security footage from the aircraft. Mr. Washington, perhaps we could discuss some compensation or accommodations. Marcus cut her off with a raised hand. Ms. Morales, respect isn't something you can upgrade to. It's either there or it isn't. Today, your airline showed me exactly where it stands. As they walked through the terminal, Marcus noticed people recognizing him, smartphones rising to capture photos and videos. The story was already spreading beyond the confines of Flight 1857. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from his company's head of public relations. The reckoning was just beginning. 2 hours after landing, Marcus Washington stood in the lobby of Coastal Airlines Bay Area headquarters, his wrinkled suit replaced with a fresh one delivered by his assistant. The receptionist glanced up as he approached the desk, her eyes widening in recognition. I'm here to see Thomas Reynolds, Marcus stated. Do you have an appointment, sir? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. He's expecting me, Marcus replied. Before the receptionist could respond, Jessica Taylor emerged from a side door, now dressed in formal business attire that reflected her corporate position. Mr. Washington, thank you for coming. She greeted him professionally, though the solidarity in her eyes remained. I'll escort you upstairs. As they walked toward the executive elevator, Marcus noted the whispers and stares from Coastal employees who recognized him. News traveled fast in corporate settings, and by now, most of the building likely knew about the incident. Reynolds has been in meetings with legal all morning, Jessica informed him quietly as they entered the elevator. They're in damage control mode, as they should be, Marcus replied. The elevator opened directly into the executive floor, where the atmosphere of controlled panic was palpable. Assistants hurried between offices with worried expressions, and through glass walls, Marcus could see groups of executives in intense discussion. Jessica led him to a waiting area outside the CEO's office. Mr. Reynolds asked that you wait here momentarily. He's finishing a call. Marcus nodded, recognizing the power play for what it was. A last attempt by Reynolds to assert control over the situation by making him wait. It was a transparent and ultimately futile gesture. While we wait, Marcus said, taking out his phone, I'd like to show you something. He pulled up the video he had edited during the car ride to the headquarters, a concise but devastating compilation of his experience on Flight 1857. From the initial seating confrontation to the crew's racist comments, to the final vindication at landing. The video ended with text identifying him as the CEO of NextGen Technologies, a Fortune 500 company. I'm posting this now, he told Jessica. Your testimony in the video is powerful. Are you comfortable with that? Jessica straightened her shoulders. Absolutely, this is bigger than my job. Marcus nodded appreciatively and pressed share. The video would go to his personal social media accounts, with a combined following of over 10 million people, as well as to selected journalists who had covered his career over the years. It's done, he said, putting his phone away. Jessica smiled grimly. Good. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to make you feel small, only for them to discover they'd picked the wrong person to mess with? Comment number 1 if you've ever had a moment of sweet justice after being mistreated. Like this video if you believe corporations should be held accountable for discriminatory practices. And subscribe to see more stories of people standing up against injustice. Now, what do you think will happen when Marcus finally meets the airline CEO face to face? The confrontation you're about to witness might be the most satisfying moment yet. 20 minutes passed, a deliberate delay that only strengthened Marcus's resolve. Finally, the double doors to Reynolds' office opened, and a harried assistant emerged. "Mr. Reynolds will see you now," she announced, her voice betraying the tension of the moment. Marcus entered the spacious corner office to find Thomas Reynolds, a tall, silver-haired man in his 60s, standing behind his desk rather than seated. Another small power play. Reynolds forced a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Washington, I want to personally apologize for your experience on Flight 1857 this morning. It falls far short of the standards we set at Coastal Airlines." Marcus didn't return the smile. "Is that your prepared statement, Mr. Reynolds? Because it sounds remarkably similar to the form responses your customer service department sends out after losing someone's luggage." Reynolds' smile faltered. "I assure you, we're taking this matter very seriously. I've already initiated an internal investigation, and the crew members involved have been suspended pending." "Suspended?" Marcus interrupted. "Not terminated? We have procedures that must be followed," Reynolds explained stiffly. "Due process for our employees is—" "Interesting that you mentioned due process," Marcus cut in. "Was I afforded due process when your crew removed me from my rightful seat, based solely on the word of a white passenger? When your captain threatened to remove me from the flight for simply requesting verification of the correct seat assignment?" Reynolds gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "Please, let's sit down and discuss how we can make this right." Marcus remained standing. "I prefer to stand, thank you." Reynolds awkwardly lowered himself into his chair, losing the height advantage he'd tried to maintain. As he did, Marcus noticed him glancing at his phone screen, which was lighting up with notifications. "Is something wrong, Mr. Reynolds?" Marcus asked. Though he knew exactly what was happening, Reynolds' face tightened as he quickly scanned his screen. "Mr. Washington, I see you've posted about this incident on social media before giving us the opportunity to address it privately. That's unfortunate." "No. What's unfortunate is that your airline discriminated against me because of my race," Marcus replied evenly. "What's unfortunate is that your employees felt comfortable making racist comments about a passenger. What's unfortunate is that I'm far from the first person this has happened to. I'm just one of the few with the platform to make you pay attention." Reynolds' phone continued to buzz with incoming messages. His assistant knocked urgently and entered without waiting for a response. "Sir, we have a situation," she said, her voice tight with panic. "The video Mr. Washington posted is going viral. Hashtag boycott Coastal Airlines is trending nationally. CNN and MSNBC are requesting statements, and our stock has dropped 3% in the last 15 minutes. Reynolds' face paled. He dismissed his assistant with a quick nod and turned back to Marcus with a completely different demeanor. "Mr. Washington, perhaps we've gotten off on the wrong foot. I'm prepared to offer you significant compensation for your inconvenience. First-class travel for life, perhaps, or I don't need your airline miles, Mr. Reynolds." Marcus interrupted. "I can buy your entire airline if I wanted to." "Then, what do you want?" Reynolds asked, the facade of corporate pleasantry crumbling. "I want justice," Marcus stated simply. "Not just for me, but for every black passenger who has been humiliated by your airline and didn't have the resources to fight back." Marcus took out his phone and placed it on Reynolds' desk, activating the speaker function. "I have some people who would like to join our conversation, if you don't mind." Before Reynolds could object, several voices came through the phone. "Thomas, it's Eleanor Richardson." The chairwoman of Coastal's board of directors' voice was razor-sharp. "I've just watched the most disturbing video involving our airline." "Mr. Washington, are you there?" "I'm here, Ms. Richardson," Marcus confirmed. "On behalf of the board, I want to express our profound dismay at what you experienced. Rest assured, we will be addressing this at the highest levels." Another voice joined in. "Reynolds, it's James Wilson from Vanguard. We hold 20% of Coastal's stock in our funds, and I'm watching your share price in freefall right now. This is a disaster." Reynolds' face had gone from pale to ashen. "Now wait a minute. This is one isolated incident, is it?" Jessica Taylor stepped forward, placing a folder on Reynolds' desk. I've compiled reports of similar incidents involving black and brown passengers over the past 18 months. This isn't isolated, it's systemic. Reynolds stared at her in shock. Miss Taylor, you're an employee of this company. This is completely inappropriate. What's inappropriate is fostering a culture where discrimination is tolerated, she replied. Firmly, Marcus watched the realization dawn on Reynolds' face. This wasn't going to be resolved with platitudes or airline miles, or even a significant cash settlement. The very foundation of his leadership was being challenged. What do you want? Reynolds asked again, his voice hollow. Marcus outlined his terms clearly and concisely. A complete overhaul of Coastal's training practices, termination of the crew members involved in the incident, a third-party audit of the airline's customer service interactions by race, and a $50 million endowment for a new foundation dedicated to combating discrimination. In the travel industry, Reynolds balked at the figure. That's completely unreasonable, Thomas. Eleanor Richardson's voice cut through the speaker. Our stock has lost nearly $1 billion in value in the past half hour. I suggest you listen carefully to Mr. Washington's proposal. The meeting continued for another hour, with board members and major investors joining the call as news of the incident spread. What had begun as a confrontation between an airline CEO and a wrong passenger had evolved into a referendum on corporate accountability for racial discrimination. As the terms were finalized, Marcus stood to leave. I expect a public statement within the hour announcing these changes and acknowledging the specific nature of the discrimination that occurred. No vague references to customer service issues or misunderstandings. Reynolds, defeated, could only nod. As Marcus turned to leave, Reynolds made one last desperate attempt. Mr. Washington, please, take down the video. We've agreed to your terms. Marcus paused at the door. The video stays up, Mr. Reynolds, not as punishment, but as education. Sometimes people need to see themselves clearly before they can change. With that, Marcus left the office, Jessica following behind him. In the elevator, she finally allowed herself a smile. That was incredible, she said quietly. It's just the beginning, Marcus replied. Real change takes more than one meeting. As they reached the lobby, Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call from his PR director. How many interview requests do we have? He asked without preamble. 37 and counting. Came the reply. Every major network and publication wants your story. Set them up, Marcus instructed. This isn't just about one flight or one airline. It's about changing the system. As he stepped out of Coastal Airlines headquarters into the bright San Francisco afternoon, Marcus Washington knew that his missed first-class seat had turned into something far more significant than he could have imagined that morning. Sometimes, the worst moments of injustice become the catalyst for the greatest change. The press conference was hastily arranged on the steps of Coastal Airlines headquarters, but nothing about Marcus Washington's delivery was unprepared. Standing before a forest of microphones and cameras from every major news outlet, he spoke with the measured confidence that had made him one of the most respected executives in America. What happened to me this morning is not unique, he began, his deep voice carrying clearly to the assembled journalists and the live stream audience that had swelled to hundreds of thousands. The only unique aspect is that I have the platform to make sure it doesn't get ignored. Behind him stood Jessica Taylor, who had made the courageous decision to speak publicly about what she had witnessed. Her presence lent additional credibility to Marcus's account, particularly as a white employee of the airline itself. I watched a successful, professional black man be humiliated for no reason other than the color of his skin, Jessica stated. When it was her turn to speak, what disturbed me most wasn't just the incident itself, but how routine it seemed to the crew. This wasn't an anomaly, it was business as usual. The press conference had been scheduled to last 30 minutes, but extended to nearly 2 hours as journalists asked question after question. Throughout, Marcus maintained his composure, refusing to be baited into expressing anger even when recounting the most humiliating aspects of his experience. This isn't about one bad flight or a few problematic employees, he explained. This is about systems that enable discrimination and companies that prioritize denial over accountability. By the time Marcus returned to his hotel suite, the video of his experience had been viewed over 20 million times. Hashtag Flying Willowblack had become the top trending topic nationally, with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination. In air travel, CNN's breaking news banner read, "Black CEO humiliated, airline stock plummets." MSNBC ran a special report titled "Discrimination at 30,000 feet." Even Fox News covered the story, though their framing focused more on the airline's customer service failure than on the racial aspects. Marcus's phone rang continuously with calls from other network executives, fellow CEOs expressing solidarity, and civil rights leaders wanting to coordinate responses. His PR team had set up an impromptu command center in an adjoining suite to manage the overwhelming media interest. The Japanese investors saw the news, Shanis informed him, handing him a freshly pressed shirt for his next interview. "They've rescheduled for tomorrow and expressed their admiration for how you're handling this." Apparently, the chairman was quite impressed. Marcus nodded, taking a moment to center himself before his interview with Anderson Cooper. The meeting with the investors had been the focal point of his day when he boarded the flight this morning. Now, it seemed almost secondary to the movement that was building around his experience. Meanwhile, Coastal Airlines was facing a corporate nightmare. Their stock had closed down 11%, wiping out over $1.2 billion in market value in a single day. Their social media accounts were overwhelmed with angry comments, and calls for boycotts were spreading across platforms. Their initial statement, a vague apology for a customer service incident, had only fueled the outrage. The contrast between their equivocation and Marcus's clear, factual account made the company appear even more evasive and untrustworthy. By evening, internet sleuths had identified Richard Whitfield as a vice president at Monroe Financial Services. His company, facing its own public relations crisis by association, placed him on administrative leave pending an investigation. His LinkedIn profile vanished, and his Twitter account was deleted after receiving thousands of angry messages. The flight crew members were similarly identified. Captain William Hayes, who had threatened to remove Marcus from the flight, had his history of passenger complaints exposed by former colleagues. Flight attendant Brittany Miller hastily made her social media accounts private after screenshots of racially insensitive posts began circulating online. Former Coastal employees, emboldened by the public attention, began sharing their own stories of the airline's problematic internal culture. A black former flight attendant revealed she had been repeatedly passed over for promotion despite exemplary performance reviews. A South Asian gate agent described being assigned to less desirable routes after complaining about discriminatory comments from a supervisor. As darkness fell over San Francisco, Marcus sat down for his final interview of the day, a one-on-one with Trevor Noah for The Daily Show. "What's been most surprising to you about the response to your story?" Noah asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. "The most surprising thing has been how unsurprised most Black Americans are. What happened to me happens every day in different forms. The only difference is that most people don't have 10 million social media followers and the resources to fight back." "Do you think anything will actually change?" Noah pressed. "It has to," Marcus replied, "because this isn't just about airlines or travel. This is about the fundamental question of whether we truly believe in equal treatment in this country. If a Black man who has succeeded by every conventional measure, education, wealth, professional achievement, can still be humiliated because of his skin color, then what does that say about our progress?" The interview, aired that same night due to its timeliness, resonated deeply with viewers. Clips spread across social media, further amplifying Marcus's measured but powerful message. Back in his hotel room, exhausted but resolute, Marcus received one more call. It was from Eleanor Richardson, the Coastal Airlines board chairwoman. "Mr. Washington, the board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning," she informed him. "We're prepared to take significant action, but we would like your input to ensure we're addressing the real issues, not just managing a PR crisis." "I appreciate that," Ms. Richardson, Marcus replied. But real change requires more than a single meeting or a hasty decision. We understand that. She assured him, this is just the beginning of a process. Would you be willing to address the board directly? Your perspective would be invaluable. Marcus agreed, knowing that this unexpected opportunity could translate his personal humiliation into institutional change. As he ended the call, he stared out at the San Francisco skyline, reflecting on how differently this day had unfolded from what he had planned. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. I saw you on the news. So proud of how you're handling this. Dad would be too. The simple message brought the first tears of the day to his eyes. His father, who had taught him to be twice as good, had not lived to see his success or this moment of taking a stand. But his lessons had prepared Marcus for both. Tomorrow would bring the board meeting, the rescheduled investor presentation, and undoubtedly more media attention. But for now, Marcus allowed himself a moment to feel the weight of the day, the humiliation, the vindication, and the responsibility of representing so many who had faced similar treatment without recourse. The movement that had begun with a disputed airplane seat was now much bigger than him, and Marcus Washington was ready to ensure it landed safely. The following morning, Coastal Airlines headquarters buzzed with nervous energy as board members arrived for the emergency meeting. Security was heightened, with additional guards posted at entrances to manage the small group of protesters that had gathered overnight, holding signs demanding accountability and systemic change. Inside the imposing boardroom on the top floor, 18 people sat around a massive mahogany table. The board members, predominantly white, predominantly male, and predominantly uncomfortable, fidgeted with pens and papers as they awaited the start of what promised to be a contentious session. CEO Thomas Reynolds sat at the head of the table, his usual commanding presence diminished by the events of the previous day. Beside him was Eleanor Richardson, the board chairwoman, whose expression suggested she had already reached conclusions that Reynolds wouldn't like. At precisely 9 a.m., the doors opened and Marcus Washington entered, accompanied by Jessica Taylor and his personal attorney. The room fell silent as he took his seat at the opposite end of the table from Reynolds, a deliberate choice that established him not as a supplicant, but as an equal in these proceedings. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Washington, Richardson began formally. As chairwoman of this board, I want to reiterate our profound apology for your experience and our gratitude for your willingness to help us address the underlying issues. Marcus nodded acknowledgement, but offered no warm reassurances. He was here for substantive change, not performative reconciliation. Richardson continued. Mr. Reynolds has prepared a comprehensive response plan that he would like to present. Reynolds cleared his throat and distributed folders to everyone present. The situation we face is serious but manageable, he began, his tone suggesting he was more concerned with the public relations aspect than the discrimination itself. I've outlined a 5-point plan that includes sensitivity training for all customer-facing staff, a review of our customer complaint procedures, immediate termination of the crew members involved in yesterday's incident, a substantial financial settlement for Mr. Washington, and a public commitment to diversity in our hiring practices. The presentation continued for 15 minutes, with Reynolds emphasizing the actions that would most visibly demonstrate the airline's response, while minimizing the deeper cultural issues at play. Throughout, Marcus listened without expression, occasionally making notes, but offering no immediate reaction. When Reynolds concluded, Richardson turned to Marcus. Mr. Washington, we'd appreciate your thoughts on this proposal. Marcus closed the folder without having touched most of its pages. Mr. Reynolds has outlined actions that might have been adequate 20 years ago, when companies could address discrimination with training videos and diversity statements, but they fall dramatically short of what's needed today. He placed his own document on the table. This is my proposal for real, lasting change at Coastal Airlines. As copies were distributed, Marcus outlined a far more comprehensive approach, an independent third-party audit of all passenger complaints over the past 5 years analyzed by race, gender, and ethnicity, a complete overhaul of training that addressed not just explicit bias, but the implicit biases that had affected his treatment. Structural changes to complaint resolution processes that would prevent crew members from becoming judge and jury in disputes, and the creation of a permanent, independently chaired diversity council with actual authority to implement changes. Most significantly, Marcus proposed the establishment of the Air Travel Equality Initiative, funded by a $50 million endowment from Coastal Airlines, but operated independently to address discrimination across the entire industry. This isn't just about fixing Coastal Airlines, Marcus explained. It's about acknowledging that what happened to me is happening throughout the industry and creating mechanisms to drive systemic change. The room fell silent as board members absorbed the scope of his proposal. Reynolds was the first to respond, his tone defensive. While these suggestions have merit, the financial implications are completely unrealistic. A $50 million endowment would severely impact our quarterly earnings and shareholder returns. As CEO, I have a fiduciary responsibility. Your fiduciary responsibility includes protecting this company from further damage, interrupted James Wilson from Vanguard, one of the airline's largest institutional investors. We lost over $1 billion in market value yesterday. If this situation isn't resolved decisively, we could lose more than $50 million in market capitalization by lunchtime. Reynolds flushed. With all due respect, James, managing a public relations crisis shouldn't mean capitulating to every demand. This isn't a PR crisis, Marcus cut in, his voice steady but forceful. This is a moral failing and a business failure. Your crew members humiliated a passenger based on race, then doubled down when questioned. Your corporate culture enabled that behavior, and your initial response attempted to minimize it. Those aren't PR problems, they're leadership problems. The tension in the room was palpable as the old guard of the board, aligned with Reynolds, faced off against newer members and major investors who recognized both the ethical and financial imperatives for significant action. Perhaps, Reynolds suggested, visibly struggling to maintain control of the meeting. We should discuss this in executive session, without outside parties present. Actually, Richardson interjected, there's another matter we need to address first. She nodded to the corporate secretary, who distributed another document to the board members. This is a dossier compiled by our general counsel overnight, containing internal communications relevant to yesterday's incident and our company's broader culture. As board members reviewed the contents, their expressions ranged from shock to dismay. The documents included emails from Reynolds dismissing previous discrimination complaints as passengers playing the race card and communications showing that Coastal's internal processes systematically discouraged the reporting and resolution of bias incidents. Most damning was an email from Reynolds to his executive team, following an incident 6 months earlier involving a prominent black entertainer. These people need to understand we run an airline, not a social justice organization. If they want special treatment, they can charter a private jet. The room erupted in overlapping conversations as board members reacted to the revelations. Reynolds attempted to defend himself, claiming the emails were taken out of context, but his protests were drowned out by the growing chorus of concerned voices. Marcus remained silent, watching the corporate drama unfold. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about a reckoning that had been long overdue. Jessica Taylor, sitting beside him, leaned over and whispered, I had no idea it went this high up. I thought it was just mid-level management setting the tone. After several minutes of chaos, Richardson called the room to order. In light of these revelations, I believe we need to address leadership questions before proceeding with Mr. Washington's proposal. What followed was essentially a boardroom coup. Reynolds fought desperately to maintain his position, alternating between defiance and pleading, but the momentum had shifted decisively against him. When Richardson called for a vote of confidence in his leadership, only 3 hands raised in support, all from the old guard who had served with him for years. Thomas, Richardson said, her tone now formal and final, the board has lost confidence in your leadership. We request your immediate resignation. The color drained from Reynolds' face as he realized his 27-year career at Coastal Airlines was ending in disgrace. You can't be serious. One incident One passenger. It was never just one incident or one passenger, Jessica Taylor stated firmly. It was a pattern, and you knew it. Reynolds looked around the table desperately for allies but found none. Even his longtime supporters had been swayed by the evidence and the financial imperative to take decisive action. "Fine," he said finally, gathering his papers with shaking hands. "I'll have my resignation letter on your desk within the hour. But this company will regret handling things this way." As Reynolds left the boardroom, a weight seemed to lift from the atmosphere. Richardson turned to Marcus. "Mr. Washington, on behalf of the board, I want to thank you for your courage and your comprehensive proposal. I believe I speak for all of us when I say we are prepared to accept it in its entirety." One by one, the board members voiced their support for Marcus's plan. The vote was unanimous, a clear signal that they understood both the moral imperative and the business necessity of meaningful change. As the meeting concluded, Richardson approached Marcus privately. "We would like to offer you a position on our board," she said. "Your perspective would be invaluable as we implement these changes." Marcus considered the offer carefully. "I appreciate the gesture, Ms. Richardson, but I believe I can be more effective as an independent advocate. However, I would be willing to serve on the advisory council for the Air Travel Equality Initiative, provided it maintains true independence." She nodded, understanding his position. "Of course, we'll respect whatever role you choose to take." As Marcus left the boardroom, his phone buzzed with a notification. The Japanese investors were confirming their meeting for that afternoon, with a message indicating their increased interest. Following the events of the past 24 hours, what had begun as a professional humiliation was transforming into an unexpected opportunity, not just for his company, but for meaningful change in an industry long plagued by unchecked discrimination. Marcus Washington had boarded a plane as a passenger and emerged as a catalyst. The journey that had begun with a disputed seat was far from over, but its course had been profoundly altered, not just for him, but for countless travelers who would never know his name but would benefit from his stand. 6 months later, Marcus Washington stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the San Francisco Fairmont Hotel. Behind him hung a banner reading Inaugural Air Travel Equality Initiative Conference, and before him sat an audience of airline executives, civil rights leaders, government regulators, and media representatives. "When I boarded that flight 6 months ago," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed room, "I was focused on an investor meeting that I thought would define my company's future. I never imagined that a dispute over an airplane seat would instead redefine an entire industry's approach to equality and dignity." The transformation that had occurred in those 6 months was remarkable by any standard. Coastal Airlines, under new leadership and with Jessica Taylor now heading their newly created Office of Passenger Advocacy and Corporate Accountability, had implemented every element of Marcus's proposal and gone beyond it in many areas. The airline had become an unlikely leader in addressing discrimination, with their comprehensive reforms serving as a model that other carriers were now scrambling to adopt. Their stock, after the initial plunge, had recovered and then climbed as their renewed commitment to ethical treatment attracted both passengers and investors concerned with social responsibility. The crew members involved in the original incident had indeed been terminated, but in a surprising development, they had requested to meet with Marcus as part of their own journey of accountability. Captain William Hayes, after initial defensiveness, had undertaken extensive anti-racism training and was now speaking to other pilots about recognizing and addressing bias in high-pressure situations. Richard Whitfield, whose career had initially seemed destroyed by his role in the incident, had similarly embraced the opportunity for growth. After losing his position at Monroe Financial, he had reached out to Marcus through intermediaries, expressing genuine remorse not just for the incident, but for the unexamined privilege that had informed his behavior throughout his life. Marcus had agreed to meet with him, not out of obligation, but from a belief that true change required engagement rather than exclusion. That meeting had led to Whitfield now serving as a corporate consultant on privilege and bias awareness, sharing his experience as a cautionary tale that resonated particularly with other white executives. The Air Travel Equality Initiative, funded initially by Coastal's $50 million endowment, but now supported by contributions from 6 other major carriers, had established a comprehensive reporting system for discrimination incidents across airlines. The data collected was already informing policy changes at the federal level, with the Department of Transportation drafting new regulations based on their findings. As Marcus continued his address, he acknowledged the Japanese investors seated in the front row. The meeting that had been the focus of his journey 6 months ago had indeed taken place, delayed but not derailed by the events on the flight. Impressed by both his innovative technology and his principled leadership during the Coastal Airlines incident, they had not only made their initial investment, but had increased it substantially, allowing NextGen's medical AI system to be implemented in hospitals across 3 continents. What began as an act of discrimination became a catalyst for transformation. Marcus told the audience, "Not because I am special, but because we collectively decided that enough was enough, that the casual humiliations and systemic biases that have been normalized for too long would no longer be accepted as the cost of being Black in America." In the audience, Jessica Taylor listened with pride. Her decision to stand up that day on the airplane had changed the trajectory of her career and her life. Now leading Coastal's accountability initiatives with a staff of 30 and a direct reporting line to the board, she had become a respected voice in corporate ethics and had recently been named to Forbes' 40 Under 40 Inches list. The true measure of our progress, Marcus continued, will not be in conferences or initiatives or policy documents. It will be in the experiences of the passengers who board flights without having to carry the additional burden of racial anxiety. It will be in the Black executive who receives the same respect as her white colleague without having to repeatedly prove she belongs in first class. It will be in the quiet dignity afforded to every traveler regardless of the color of their skin. As he concluded his remarks to thunderous applause, Marcus reflected on the unexpected journey of the past 6 months. The humiliation he had felt that day in seat 3 for B had been transformed into something powerful and lasting. His father's admonition to be twice as good had proven true once again, but this time with a different outcome, not just personal success, but systemic change. After the applause subsided, and as attendees moved toward breakout sessions, a young Black entrepreneur approached Marcus. "Mr. Washington," the young man said, extending his hand, "I just wanted to thank you. I travel weekly for my startup, and since your stand against Coastal, I've noticed a difference in how I'm treated. It's subtle, but it's real." Marcus shook his hand warmly. "What's your company?" "HealthSync Technologies. We're developing telehealth solutions for underserved communities." "Send me your pitch deck," Marcus replied with a genuine smile. "NextGen is always looking for innovative partners." The young man's eyes widened. "Seriously, that would be amazing." As they exchanged contact information, Marcus felt the full circle of the moment. His stand had not just been about a seat on an airplane, or even about the principle of equal treatment. It had been about creating space, both literal and figurative, for those who would come after him, for the next generation of Black excellence that would build on the foundations laid by their predecessors. Later that evening, as the conference concluded, Marcus stood by the hotel windows overlooking San Francisco Bay. Jessica joined him, 2 colleagues now bonded by their shared experience. "Did you ever imagine it would lead to all this?" she asked, gesturing to the conference that was winding down around them. Marcus shook his head. "Never. But that's how change often happens, not from grand plans, but from moments when someone simply says enough. The work isn't done," Jessica noted. "We're still seeing incidents, still collecting reports of discrimination. It will never be completely done," Marcus acknowledged. "But we've changed the conversation. We've created consequences. We've made it harder to dismiss these experiences as isolated incidents or misunderstandings." As they stood in companionable silence watching the sunset over the Golden Gate Bridge, Marcus reflected on the journey that had begun 6 months ago. From the humiliation of seat 3 for B to this moment of industry transformation, the path had been unexpected but ultimately profound. The true victory wasn't in the corporate changes or the policy reforms, important as those were. It was in the shift in consciousness, the recognition that dignity wasn't a privilege to be earned, but a right to be expected. It was in the knowledge that his stand had made the journey a little easier for the next person, and the person after that. Sometimes, Marcus thought as the last rays of sunlight glinted off the bay. Transformation begins with a single seat on an airplane and ends with changing an entire industry. This powerful story teaches us that dignity isn't negotiable, regardless of your status. Marcus Washington's experience reveals how racism persists even for those who have made it. By conventional standards, his response demonstrates that effective change requires both personal courage and strategic action. Individual stands matter, but lasting transformation demands systemic solutions. The airline crew's assumptions about who belongs in first class expose how implicit bias operates daily, invisible to those who don't experience it but painfully evident to those who do. Jessica Taylor reminds us that allyship isn't just emotional support, but active intervention. When witnessing injustice, most importantly, this story illustrates that accountability isn't punishment. It's the necessary foundation for progress. When Coastal Airlines faced their failure honestly, they created opportunity from crisis. The crew members who embraced personal growth show that redemption is possible through genuine reflection and changed behavior. Marcus's journey proves that sometimes the most significant victories come from our most humiliating moments, not because suffering is necessary, but because injustice exposed creates space for justice to take root. What would you do if you were in Marcus's position? Have you ever witnessed discrimination and chosen to speak up or stay silent? Comment below with your experiences. If you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of race, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories of people challenging injustice. Share this video with someone who needs this message today. Thank you for watching. And remember, your voice matters in creating the world we all deserve to live in.